5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ben.
I'm Mark Edward.
Oh, wow. I got his name right this time. And this is Amateur Hour.
Now, I forget, are these name tags in the final video?
Yeah, I think it's because I streamer. I got the Holy Spirit for a minute. StreamYard sets it up that way. So it's
Okay.
kind of irritating. I hate it. But I'm Ben and you're me.
Yep.
Oh, that's confusing. But because I'm me.
No, I'm me.
But you're me. I thought I was Ben, but I'm me. Who's on first? I don't know. So
That joke came in really, really handy when Among Us was really big during COVID lockdown.
Oh, really? I didn't play. My son loves Among Us.
Handful of friends wanted to play, invited me along, and my username was me. It's like who's the killer? It's me.
Me. Oh, that would be super irritating. That would be super irritating. Yes. So we've actually recording this episode back to back with the last one. So really not much has happened. I had to go pee. I think you looked for a new hoodie, but you weren't bougie enough to find one.
No, it's right there. I just didn't feel like changing.
Oh, so you're lazy. That's what you're telling everybody. That's okay. I mean,
it's red. My background's red. My chair's
just
red. I don't want to like go invisible here.
That's true. Yeah, you don't do that. Talked about how old we are. That was depressing. So, anyways, the last time, 10 minutes ago, that we talked, we entered into Moses. We're talking about the historicity of the Exodus, and the Exodus being the story of Israel's escape from Egypt, from the house of slavery, and essentially crossing into the promised land. And for people who aren't familiar, of course, you can just read the book of Exodus, especially chapters 1 through about 15.
Yeah.
To get the gist of the story. And we noted various problems with that narrative, like the population issue, the dating of the Exodus, especially the way that different narratives date the story. The Hebrew Bible is not univocal about it. There's many voices that have different views. But the Exodus is foundational for Christianity in many ways. So, what do we make of that foundational aspect if what we see, what we read about in the Exodus narratives and in other narratives in the Hebrew Bible about that story, simply not true? They're not factual. What is the takeaway?
You have to be careful with that word "true" because
That's
not
true.
Historical does not automatically mean not true.
Yeah, you're right.
Especially when it comes to this area of truth.
Yeah.
So really, like you were saying, by all accounts, the story of the Exodus as told in the Bible is not historical. It is a historical falsehood in terms of whether it actually happened that way or not. Most scholars would agree that it just didn't happen. Some scholars would argue, well, maybe this part did, or maybe it was inspired by this kind of similar thing, but on a much, much smaller scale. But for lack of nuance, we will just say the Exodus did not happen. It is not historical. Yeah. So the it's foundational, at least in the Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament, what Jews call the Tanakh, and the Hebrew Bible itself is foundational for the Christian religion, for the emergence of Christianity from within Judaism in the first century. But today, recognition of the Exodus as not historical is so widespread in scholarship that even most religious teachers within Christianity, like religiously devout, except for the most stringent conservative theologians, they accept that it's not historical.
Yeah.
And to me, it's really puzzling how they can compartmentalize this detail so effectively when, in my opinion, the lack of a historical Exodus should have huge ripple effects across the Hebrew Bible, the Christian New Testament, and Christian theology as a whole.
Yeah.
And I honestly think it's really hard to understate just how significant it is that the Exodus did not happen when it comes to that religion of Christianity.
Well, so let's kind of get into that then, because, like, for example, I think it's safe to say that Jesus would have believed that the Exodus story actually happened. That the earliest followers of Jesus, who were all Jews, would have believed there was a literal Moses. The Exodus happened exactly as they were told in synagogue. For the few that could read, as they might be able to read in the Torah. That seems like an issue, right? Because if Jesus, who is the essentially foundational figure of Christianity, believes something that did not actually happen, there are theological implications there, especially for those who think he's God. Because God, by definition, cannot believe in falsehoods or things that did not actually happen. But that seems minor compared to some of the things that you're kind of alluding to, like the issues with it. So kind of go into that.
So even before Christianity, before Jesus, really the first place we should start looking for the potential impact of a not historical Exodus is the Hebrew Bible itself. So in terms of the narrative of the Hebrew Bible, we have these patriarchs, these ancient patriarchs. Their descendants are enslaved in Egypt. They escape from Egypt. Where do they escape to? This land north of Egypt called Canaan. They kick out or kill the residents of Canaan and move in. And eventually they eventually form their own kingdom with a king and a dynasty and the historical events further after that. But when it comes to the Exodus, the very next point of the story is the Israelite invasion of the land of Canaan. If there was no Exodus, if there was no population escaping from Egypt to move northward, there was no invasion of Canaan.
Yeah.
That effectively eliminates the entire book of Joshua as historical.
Yeah.
So it's not just the Torah itself, the first 5 books, it's the first 6 books.
Yeah.
But that leads us into the next book, the book of Judges. The book of Judges establishes from the first 3 or 4 chapters that the situation these Israelites find themselves in, where they don't have a kingdom yet, they don't have a king, they don't really have any form of organized government. They just have these kind of isolated pockets that they've settled into, only slightly interacting with each other. And because of that lack of cohesion of their population, they keep being attacked by foreign enemies or even local enemies who are not Israelites. So God has to raise up these saviors, for lack of a better term, what the book calls judges, to step in and rescue the Israelite tribes here and there across the land over about 400 years, roughly. And the text says that God is doing this because he's keeping his promise to the Israelites from the Exodus that he is going to protect them and ensure that they survive. But Book of Judges, even on its own, reads as a very legendary, almost mythical set of stories, depending on which judge you're talking about. So the foundation for the reason of the judges existing, of these socio-political rescuers, their motivation in the text is based on the Exodus. Well, if there was no Exodus, why are these guys doing what they do? Are they historical? Probably not. Well, then we move a little bit more forward into this biblical narrative, and we get to the establishment of the kingdom of Israel with King David and his son Solomon. And the text tells us once again that the Israelites need to obey this new king because it's part of this larger relationship between God and Israel that was established in the Exodus.
Yeah.
So you have this continuous ripple effect across the Hebrew Bible's historical narrative. It continues into when the kingdom of Israel, David's kingdom, splits in two, the north and the south. A new kingdom named Israel to the north, a new kingdom to the south named Judah. Judah is continued to be ruled by David's dynasty, but these other kings rule in the north. But within the story, within the biblical narrative, and thus within the Christian narrative, these two kingdoms are still in a covenant relationship with the God who rescued them during the Exodus. So when the residents of Israel or the residents of Judah stop obeying the instructions God gave them from the Exodus hundreds of years ago, he starts to punish them. And this eventually leads to the destruction of both kingdoms. And the way the story is told, not just in this historical narrative, but in all the books after it, all the way up through the New Testament, these kingdoms are destroyed because they disobeyed the law, capital L law, that God gave them in the Exodus, gave their ancestors in the Exodus. If there was no Exodus, where did this law come from? Why are Israel and Judah required to follow it? This is a valid question to ask, because if the historical foundation of this law is not historical, why are they obligated to follow this law? Certain kings in these kingdoms, before they fall, are praised or condemned based on whether they helped uphold that law or they disobeyed it. After they're destroyed and the Jews are taken into exile by a rival kingdom, the Babylonians, some number of years later, about 50 years later, Babylon is conquered by a third kingdom, Persia, and the Persians allow the Jews to return to their land, the land of Judah. And they establish a client governorship under Persia. And in that context, the Persians allow the Jews to build a new temple in Jerusalem, because the first one, maybe built by Solomon, was destroyed. But the biblical narrative says they are building this second temple in obedience to the law of the Torah that was given during the Exodus. The book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah both say this. And it even goes beyond historical events. It goes into some of the moral implications of what people are doing, what these Second Temple era Jewish people are doing. In the book of Nehemiah, you see a lot of really strict discrimination against non-Jewish people. And it says they're doing this because the law from Exodus says to do it. So now you have moral decisions. It's impacting people outside of their own religious group. They are imposing their religious perspective on other people and saying that it's a moral thing. Then you get beyond that into the topic of prophecy, where you have a prophet here or a prophet there, this prophet named Nathan, or this prophet named Samuel, or a prophet named Isaiah or Jeremiah, or one of the other dozen in the Hebrew Bible, where the message that they are presenting, God says, don't do this. God is going to destroy this kingdom because they did this. God is going to punish the Jews because they did this. Or he's going to rescue the Jews because he said this a long time ago. It's all going back to this idea of a much older tradition that God has a relationship with this nation, the Jewish people, that he is obligated to, and that they are obligated to him. That they must do what he says, and that he promises to do what he said he would do. If it goes back to the Exodus and the Exodus didn't happen, why is that obligation there?
Yeah.
And this continues much further into history. It goes to the Maccabean revolt, where the book of Daniel says that this crisis happening in the 2nd century BCE happened because the Jewish people were not faithful enough to the law given during the Exodus. Now, that's all Jewish scripture. And just for the sake of this video, we're not really getting into the Jewish religion or the Jewish perspective.
Yeah.
Neither of us has really been exposed to the Jewish perspective. We didn't grow up in it. So that's outside of our purview. We're mostly talking about the Christian perspective because that's what we're most familiar with. Hence, this continues into the New Testament, where, as you said, the New Testament, by and large, confirms that the law, meaning the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, was written by Moses as a historical person. But we don't really have evidence that he existed. Or if he did exist, that he didn't write these books.
Yeah.
Jesus confirms this. Paul confirms this. Any book that mentions Moses or the Exodus confirms this in the New Testament. Jesus tells people to obey the Torah. Not just people, Jewish people. That they must obey the Torah. They must obey Moses. And he offers correct interpretations of ambiguous parts of the Torah's law code. Like one example is when he gives an instruction on divorce, what a valid context for divorce is. Moses allowed divorce because XYZ.
Yeah.
There's even a passage in Matthew, Mark, and Luke that says Jesus spoke to Moses. Moses appeared to him from heaven. It's assuming Moses is a historical person who is still existent in some capacity.
Yep.
Maybe not physically alive on earth, but he's alive somewhere, heaven. And then you get further and further into Christian theology in the New Testament, which is largely apocalyptic, meaning it follows a certain perspective of the world, that the world is going to end soon. And the reason for this end is because a universal crisis is going to unfold. And this crisis is based on the distinction between righteous followers of God within that covenant relationship from the Exodus and people outside it.
Yeah.
So the lack of an Exodus as a historical thing, the lack of a Moses as a recognizable historical figure, if he ever was one, it's a giant domino effect across the entire Bible. And in my opinion, it calls into question the validity of the religion itself of Christianity. Not to question Christianity as a moral thing, not to question it as an evolving thing yet. But the founding figure of Christianity, Jesus, and his apostles, Peter, Paul, whoever else, they all treat it like it's historical, the Exodus. And if it's not historical, where are they getting their ideas from? Yeah. What are they basing their claims on? To me, that's you can't talk about Christian theology and also acknowledge the lack of a historical exodus without wrestling with the two at the same time.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if so the kernel of Christianity is that Jesus of Nazareth died, rose, and is with God the Father.
Yeah.
So I don't.
That's the absolute bare bones definition.
Well, it's Paul's gospel. You know, he preached it to his Gentile audience, and presumably got, or at least was not in total disagreement with the Jewish apostles of like Peter and James. I mean, they disagreed on matters, but so if you define Christianity that way, I guess you could argue the definition. Does the Exodus really impact that? I mean, at least in my mind, there's nothing that I can see that directly impacts that aspect. So why then do you think it is such an important issue that needs to be wrestled with?
So the way that Christianity operates today and has for the last 2,000 years, and this is talking about the majority. There's always going to be a tiny, almost microscopic, unseen minority that has their own idiosyncratic views on these kinds of things. Yeah. And this is not to comment on them. This is commenting on the larger picture of capital O Orthodox, capital C Catholic, or capital P Protestant Christianities, where according to the majority of Christian denominations around the world, Jesus is who he is because of what is talked about in the Hebrew Bible, or what expectations were built up based on the Hebrew Bible before Jesus came along. So when the New Testament says he's the Messiah, what does that mean?
Yeah, there's context.
What is the Messiah? The Messiah is supposed to be a descendant of King David. Well, why is that a special person? Because King David became king within the context of this Israelite God covenant, and that obedience to the King of Israel, obedience to King David and his dynasty, is rooted in the Exodus covenant, the relationship between God and Israel. Or you have the New Testament's apocalyptic layer of theology, which says that Jesus, as the Messiah, is the Son of Man, predicted in the book of Daniel. Well, the book of Daniel makes these predictions because it's saying this is going to happen because of the temple being desecrated, and the temple is desecrated because God is mad at us because we didn't obey the covenant and the Torah and the law code from the Exodus well enough. So all these expectations about who Jesus is supposed to be in the New Testament are rooted in this. It's this like
Jesus' fundamental identity.
What?
Yeah, his identity as Christ, as Messiah, is called into question because that word Messiah has historical baggage.
Yeah.
And to be called Messiah and ignore the baggage makes him anachronistic, right? He's a figure out of history, and so really he has no bearing on history. But if you place him in his native context, what you're saying is that to appreciate his messianic status means that all that past material that everyone said really happened, if it didn't really happen, it just completely undermines his the whole purpose of his coming.
Because if you remove all of that context, you're just left with a dude. And then in that case, why is this dude in particular worth listening to and paying attention to?
Yeah. Yep.
Because then he's just one of many dudes saying many things.
Yeah.
They're like within the biblical story, Hebrew Bible plus New Testament, Jesus is important because of this continuity behind him. You know, he's season 8 in a 10 season long TV show. You can't make sense of seasons 8, 9, and 10 without those first 7 seasons.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, and if you tell me that season 7 was a dream, you know what I mean? Like, it didn't really happen, and then you're building. Yeah, that's it's kind of like the ending of Lost. I didn't like the show. My wife made me watch it, and then you watch the ending, and if you have not seen this, it's a spoiler. It's basically just, is it a dream? Did any of it really like, are they in purgatory? It's just, it ruined the TV show, but it calls into question everything that happened before it. And you can't, like, how do you make meaning out of that? So it's kind of like that. It's kind of like, you know, if you tell me the past is not the past, then the present has no context. It has no meaning that we can give it based on prior events.
Yeah.
Which is very frustrating. But yeah. Yeah,
So there are, or at least have been, and probably still are, forms of Christianity that did or do attempt to separate that continuity, where they try to cut that string and they put Jesus over here and all of the Hebrew Bible and everything in it and all its implications over there. In the ancient world, this was primarily restricted to a group of different Christian sects that we call Gnostics. Valentinians, Basilidians, Marcion, and a handful of others. But even then, when they did this, they were still coming up with this revised theological worldview in context of that Hebrew Bible. They never fully successfully cut that string because they had to explain why Jesus is talking about that stuff in the first place. It's because he's arguing against it and refuting it because he's from a better, superior God, not that one.
Yeah.
So you never really find any context that successfully, thoroughly separates Jesus from his historical context and for lack of a better term, those first 7 seasons of the TV show he's the star in. So what you're really left with is contemporary Christianities, Protestant or Catholic or Orthodox or whoever, where, and I don't mean this pejoratively, but it's this very revisionist theology. Where they acknowledge that the Exodus is not historical. They compartmentalize that non-historicity, and everything after that, well, that's historical, and that's why Jesus matters.
Selective.
And they usually appeal to some form of progressive revelation, is what they call it, where God, the creator of the cosmos, the creator of all the universe, this supreme deity who does exist, and he's the one and only God out there at all ever, and he just for some reason deigned to step down and insert himself into the story of this one particular religious minority in a small pocket on planet Earth. And he allowed this one group to set up the boundaries and expectations and definitions for who he is, and he just kind of rolled with it. And only very, very slowly over the next 3,000 years revealed a little bit more about who he really is to his followers, but never in any linear fashion, never in any clear way. It's always one guy here, one guy there, and they write a book, or they staple some papers onto their church door,
Yeah.
or they write a blog article or whatever, or they preach a sermon on a Sunday in the 19th century in Eastern America during a revival. And just these very small increments reveal who he really is. And what he really is almost nothing like the God described in the text that this entire religion is based on, but only incrementally. And my question, in response to that, and this is an argument I see very often, but I don't want to pin it on anybody in particular because I'm describing it in a very general way.
Yeah.
How can we possibly know that this is what's happening? If it happens so slowly and so incrementally, like, what can you point to that demonstrates this is the case? Nothing in the Bible implies it. As far as the text of the Bible implies, it's one continuous story. Despite all the discontinuities and contradictions between biblical texts, such as what we talked about in our previous discussion, the 3 or 4 different timelines for the Exodus, all present in the Bible, they all talk, like, the Bible itself, when you take it as a whole unit, talks about itself as one continuity. Where in there is the point when this otherwise unknown supreme being inserts himself in the story and says, okay, yeah, I'm the God that this group is worshiping. Like, they're the ones I'm going to decide to connect to and relate with. And when they talk about this covenant relationship that happened at this non-existent event 500 years ago, that's me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm the one who did that. When does this happen? Does it happen in Joshua? Does it happen like he helped this invasion take place? Or did he insert himself in the story when he needs to raise up these judges to rescue these people?
Yeah.
Or is it when he's founding this dynasty? Like, where in the story does this unknown God step in and say, yeah, I'm Yahweh?
Yeah.
And in that case, why not Baal from another Canaanite deity?
Yeah.
Or the Mesopotamian deity Marduk? Or go over to the Greeks. Why not Zeus? Or why not the Persian deity Ahura Mazda? Why not Odin? Or whatever his predecessor was in Proto-Norse mythology.
Yeah.
Why not Quetzalcoatl? Or why not Oro, a deity most of you have never heard of?
I haven't.
Why not any of them? Why specifically Yahweh? Because when you look at this deity Yahweh in the Hebrew Bible, and you compare him to contemporary religions in Mesopotamia or Egypt or Arabia, Indo-European religion in general, he's not really exceptional. He looks and acts like a deity from the time period. He's very warlike. He has a special preference or precedence over storms. And then as his religion grows, he slowly accumulates more and more power to become a more universal deity. But that's more or less what you would expect.
Yeah.
In historical terms, if this religion is nothing exceptional. So why is it exceptional? Why did this supreme God decide to identify with this one religion? And when did it happen? And does him doing that somehow validate this relationship, this covenant and law code in the Torah, if it didn't actually happen? Yeah. Those are my questions.
Yeah. So you're really, like, the issue seems to be that for certain segments of Christianity, on the one hand, the Exodus not being true undermines everything else. And for more progressive Christians, it's almost like they're trying to have their cake needed too, right?
Yeah.
We can deny it, but still accept everything the Gospels say about Jesus, or affirm an orthodox understanding where he is this divine figure, And he comes to Israel, but in Israel that doesn't have the historical context that it was said to have had. Um, uh, those are just problematic claims.
Yeah.
I mean, why not a different people? Why not, why not go to China where there's millions upon millions of people? Why does that have to be Israel? Well, because Israel has this unique relationship with Yahweh per the Torah, which is seriously undermined by the historical evidence or lack thereof. So, yeah, I think that
from my point of view, what you end up with within these more progressive forms of Christianity, and I would say that when it comes to this topic, most Christians are progressive, meaning they accept the historical criticism that the Exodus didn't happen, at least not anywhere near what the Bible depicts.
Yeah.
They accept that the biblical version is not historical, but then they also, like they are Christians.
Yeah.
And they try to put them together. So from my point of view, the complex explanations they come up with to justify that disharmony, that discordance between the two, it's like you're watching somebody trying to put out fire after fire after fire in their house, yet that person never sees a problem with the fact that their house is built out of extremely combustible material that they are completely aware is there. Like they know their house is ready to burn down at any moment.
Yeah.
Because they know it's built out of material that is ready to burn.
Yeah. No,
like,
I mean, I think you're right.
At that point, like the solution is to get a house built out of better material.
Yeah.
Why hold on to the combustible stuff, the extremely dangerous flammable stuff? So it's like acknowledging that their religion evolved over 2,000, 3,000 years, or at least that it should evolve. We should continually update as we discover new information that undermines what we've believed in the past. It reads to me as an admission that their religion is a human construction.
Yeah.
Because at what point in that process is God involved? Did God help us? Like, did the God of the Exodus, the God who rescued the people from Egypt and brought them out of slavery and moved them into Canaan and set up the dynasty of King David and established all of that, all in preparation for the Messiah, Jesus, did he help us discover the Nag Hammadi library or the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Ugaritic texts that shed more light on this stuff and show why it's not historical?
Yeah.
Because then it feels like he's undermining his own religion. So if they are admitting, like if they are evolving their religion to accommodate for these changes that undermine it as it was believed in the past, it's almost an admission that that their theology is changing to adapt and not true. It's not universally true. It's true in the moment. It's true because they need it to be according to our terms in the present day. It's like we have an algorithm built by society and they're trying to escape that algorithm filtering them out.
No, that makes
to
sense.
me, like, it's just the Exodus not being historical ripples across the entire Bible all the way up to Jesus himself and creates this insurmountable problem where the only solution is to dehistoricize the whole thing. And at that point, what's the purpose of it?
Yeah. And why pick those moments to strip of their historicity and not ones that you just happen to want to believe?
Mm-hmm.
That does seem to be a problem.
So
of course, that's exactly.
I've been kind of talking for a while. What are your thoughts on it?
Well,
This
I
is
don't
like
know.
so far it's been kind of, I feel like it's been me unloading my brain and like just putting these out in the ether for people to hear. What are your thoughts?
Well, so on the historicity issue, I'm pretty sold that the narrative didn't happen as Exodus, especially like chapter 12, where it has all these millions of implied people. It didn't happen like that. I think it happened with a much smaller subset. I do think that is a problem for Christianity. I think that represents a serious concern, much in the same way that Paul's appeal to Adam and the Adam myth represents a problem for his view of sin. There's a serious issue there. For Orthodox Christianity, who believe that Jesus is a divine figure, omniscient, for him to assert things like, Moses wrote this, or, you know, uh, like back to Adam, but he made them male and female in the beginning. These are issues. We know these things did not happen as described. For Jesus to base his teaching, it makes sense for him to be a first century Jew and believe them. I have no issue with that. But for him to be God, with all that we know, that undermines a significant part of Christian theology. Yeah. And this accommodation that progressive Christians do, while I can appreciate it, and on so many issues we're allies, it nevertheless reads to me as, like I said before, I want to have my cake and eat it too. Yeah. And I'm sure there's areas in my life where I do that kind of stuff. But for something that big, just seems like a huge. It's not like, I'm not saying they got to become atheists or agnostics,
not at all.
It seriously calls into question the validity of the core Christian message.
The core historically dominant Christian message.
Yeah. Well, Jesus is his title, Jesus Christ, is Jesus the Messiah. And like you said, if there's no context to that word, what is the value in it? All the writers of the New Testament, save for maybe some of the later authors, understood Christ to be a reference to Messiah. I think Paul did. I think the gospel writers had that baggage in mind.
They call him the Son of David.
Yeah, there's very explicit terminology.
Revelation invokes Psalms that talk about David and talk about this Israelite king.
Yep.
It kind of dovetails into this one of the defenses I often see in this context is what I would call a revision of how prophecy operates in the Bible, where in the traditional sense, the classical Christian theological sense, prophecy is somebody who has knowledge of the future, describes it in the present.
Yeah. So
when you read Isaiah and he's prophesying, he has knowledge of future events from God or angels or whatever, and he's telling it or he's writing it down, whatever exactly. And you can read Isaiah and him predicting events in the future before they happen, as they happen. Well, that's prophecy.
Yeah.
And there's always some kind of socio-political message to those prophecies, but the point is he's predicting the future as it will happen. It happens as he predicted.
Yeah.
And it happens as he predicted because he knew it would happen that way. So in that definition, when the New Testament says that Jesus fulfills prophecy, it is saying that these prophets, hundreds of years in the past, thousands of years in the past even, had knowledge of Jesus before he even existed.
Yeah.
That God told these prophets, in the year 4 or 5 BCE, this guy named Jesus is going to be born. He is the Messiah, which means he's going to rescue all humanity from their sins if they choose to, if they have faith, not works, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But the more revisionist version of prophecy is that fulfillment of prophecy is not knowledge of future events being happening how they're predicted. It is prophets, so-called, operating within certain boundaries that their society has established, and they have expectations for what a future rescuer or king or whatever is going to do. And this universal unknown God who steps down and says, yeah, sure, I'm Yahweh, let's go with that. He just kind of rolls with those expectations, and he operates within their boundaries that they set up,
which is strange.
And that's what fulfillment is. It's not fulfillment in terms of foreknowledge of future events. It's fulfillment in the sense that you set these boundaries, I'm going to work with those. Kind of like a husband or wife fulfilling their marriage vows. It's not a prediction of what they're going to do. It's just them living according to it.
Yeah.
But the reason I think that this is revisionist is because that's just not what the text says in the Hebrew Bible. Like when you read the book of Daniel, for example, it specifically says God decides what kingdoms rise, what kingdoms fall. And therefore we can know that these kingdoms in the next 400 years or whatever are going to rise and fall as he says. It presents it as a prediction of events and not just a generic hope or expectation. Or social boundary that you should follow. That's not what it is. And that's why I consider it a more revisionist interpretation of prophecy. And as such, I see it as a after the fact Band-Aid solution to a problem that emerges because of information we've found in the meantime.
Yeah.
So if you have the New Testament calling Jesus the Messiah, the Son of David, the Son of Man, and he's going to do X, Y, Z because it's prophecy that he will do these things. If there's no historical basis to those prophecies, like if it's not a foreknowledge, just an expectation, especially when they're given it in continuity with the Torah's law code, like the Torah's law says God's going to do this because he promised, and that's the covenant relationship, etc., etc. If it's irrelevant to a truth value, why does this Jesus guy, why do they operate within these boundaries? Why are they obligated to do it? And questions like that, I just feel like there's not really any sufficient answer to. I don't think anybody has satisfactorily responded to these kinds of questions and come out the other side saying, like, everything makes sense, as opposed to, oh, here's these questions. Oh, yeah, like we kind of have to acknowledge that this is a problem. This is a problem. Divine mystery. We can't answer these. Let's just throw our hands in the air, believe anyway.
Yeah. I think some people are just okay with the tension. You know what I mean? Like they don't mind it being, like there's something attractive about mystery. I get that. But for something as big as this, I think it's just kind of a when you can't
there's
ignore
fun.
it.
There's fun in mystery. There's joy in the pursuit of the mystery and maybe finding an answer. But when the mystery is just throw your hands in the air, say you don't know, and just believe anyway against your ability to think it through and problem solve, that just strikes me as a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, like one of the greatest mysteries of the universe is is there life on other planets? And it's fun to pursue the question. It's fun to ponder it. But if I found out that there was something unique about our neighborhood in the galaxy that only allowed life here, that mystery goes away,
Yeah.
right? That information would seriously undermine the mystery. And I think you're right. I think in this case, it seriously undermines the mystery. Um, so we probably just need to start wrapping it up. But one thing I did want to say is I do find persuasive Friedman's argument for a variety of reasons.
Sure.
But all his evidence, and you alluded to this earlier, it's all text based because there is no outside corroborating evidence. Everything we have is within the text. And so anybody who approaches the issue has got to be honest with it. So apologists who want to come and be like, well, we have evidence for the conquest narrative, we have evidence for the Exodus. No, you don't. You just don't. You're cherry picking data. You're appealing to old scholarship, and
Or
that's a
you're following
problem.
outright frauds.
Exactly.
And
And
that's really harsh to say, but some of these so-called theological archaeologists were frauds.
yeah, yeah, and it's often based in, like I said, much older archaeology, like William Albright, who worked in good faith, were
Yeah.
competent archaeologists, but because archaeology is a field of science, or at least science adjacent, it's a mixture of history and science.
Yeah.
Your findings are always going to be subject to the next person who does research, which is what happens in the case of especially the conquest narratives, is you just don't have the data anymore. It's been fundamentally undermined, overturned, whatever language you want to use. But I just, any apologist who might watch this, unless you're up to date on the research, unless you're citing excellent scholarship, you don't bring anything to the table. I guess just you just don't. You just don't. It's just a waste of time. But I do recommend Richard Elliott Friedman's book for anybody who's not read it. You may not be convinced, like I am, and I don't think there's really any major scholars that have found the work, paradigm shifting.
For the most
a good
part,
case.
For the most part, I don't find Friedman convincing.
Yeah.
But I will still say he is worth reading.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't mean that in like it's worth reading and to laugh at it. Like, no, like he's legitimately, he has good thoughts.
Yeah.
And
he's
he has
funny.
good ideas worth considering.
Yeah. And anybody who's either, like, if you've watched a lecture where he's taught, he is so, the way he writes, he's just, you want to hang out with the guy. He's delightful. But either way. So let's close this episode of Amateur Hour. Let's talk about books we're enjoying. I've got one, but Mark, if you got any you want to talk about, nerd out on,
sure.
or whatever.
Yeah. I recently have read a couple of books by one of my favorite authors. He's done a lot of short stories available online for free. His name is Seth Dickinson. I love the way he writes, the way he world builds. I love the way he uses language and kind of invents new words that just feel totally natural. He had a sci-fi book, I think it came out last year or the year before, called Exordia, where it's a sci-fi story where it's essentially one trolley problem after another.
Is it a novel? Is it like a novel or a collection of short stories?
It's a single story. It's a novel.
Okay.
Adapted from a short story he wrote some number of years ago.
Oh, okay.
But it's about 500 pages.
Ooh.
And it's just each chapter, the trolley problem keeps getting more complex, and it's always the characters trying to decide, how do we make a moral decision here?
Yeah.
Through the whole story. And then I also, after that, read his book. I think it's a little bit older than that one. The Trader Baru Cormorant. Not a sci-fi, more of a fantasy, but not in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
It's actually very untraditional for a fantasy. It's about economics and how economics can be used to channel a rebellion against government.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's very well written. I enjoy his style in general.
Yeah. Didn't you tell me? He worked on the video game.
Oh yeah, I discovered Seth Dickinson
Destiny.
through the game of Destiny, which I am a huge fan of, or at least was. Destiny started in 2014, and it finally wrapped up its main story in 2024 this summer. And now that I've finally reached the end of that story, it's kind of their version of the MCU Avengers Endgame, where it's like all these stories along the way, and you finally get to the big grand ending, and there's stuff after it, but it's not as interesting.
Yeah.
But he was one of the primary contributors to the story of Destiny, and that's how I found him, and I just love the way he writes.
That's good. That's good. I'm gonna plug a book I've been reading. It's taken me a while because I've been distracted by other things, but Esther Mori's book, God's Monsters. I don't know if you've seen this one, but I really like horror, as you know, and I've really been getting into the merging of the Bible and horror, like some monster theory.
Is it written as a fiction book?
No, it's nonfiction. It's an analysis of, like, the first chapter is about the seraphim and the second chapter is about the cherubim, and she goes through all these creatures. Yeah, and she's talking about she is brutal about what these beings say about their master, about Yahweh. She can be brutal, like toward God, the God of the Bible. She's really good. She appeals to monster theory and things like that. So horror fans might like that, just because she's looking at the Bible in a different angle, one that most people probably aren't really thinking about it. But there is a lot of horror in the Bible. So I've been really enjoying some of her insights, and I can't wait to eventually finish it when I get a chance. But
I'll have to pick that up because I really enjoy that.
Yeah, it came out last year.
Cosmological horror.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's she's really good. She draws out details that sometimes you just wouldn't always pick up on your own. And I think her focus is mainly the Hebrew Bible. I don't think she goes into any of the New Testament texts in depth, but what she does go into is really good. So I think you'd like that. And I think most people who watch this would probably like it too. So, well, we probably should wrap it up now. And we covered a lot of ground in a really condensed format.
There was still some parts of my notes that we had to skip right over just to keep the ball rolling.
Yeah, that's just so much. Have you written about any of this for the blog, for your website, A Bible Darkly? You've focused mainly on New Testament stuff, but have you touched on this?
Oh, I mean, I kind of jump all over the Bible. It's really just whatever grabs my interest at the moment. I think I have one, maybe two articles that go into the Exodus. Okay. I think one of them is about the connection with Jeroboam. Jeroboam the first, Jeroboam the second. And I think there's another one that goes a bit more into the connection with the patriarchs.
Okay. I think I've read the Jeroboam. I don't think I've read the one on the patriarchs. But I'll post a link to, obviously, the website so people can check it out. A Bible Darkly. Maybe someday you'll do the YouTube channel again. I don't know.
What YouTube channel?
Yeah, exactly. See, you can't gaslight me. I knew there was one. I've linked to it before. Either way, so those who have watched, thanks for stopping by. And I'm Ben, and that's Mark. This has been Amateur Hour. I guess we'll see you next time.